Good evening all. Greetings from GE Healthcare and Eid Mubarak. This is Srinivasa Murthy. I am the GM Diagnostic Cardiology, Wipro GE Healthcare. At the outset, welcome you all. Thank you very much for registering and joining for today's panel discussion on preventive strategies for high-risk patients in COVID-19 era. So in today's session, we will be covering preventive steps for patients with high blood pressure, care for diabetic patients, care of patients with heart disease. We have eminent panelists with us, Professor Dr. Upendra Kaul and Professor Dr. C.G. Bahulian. Unfortunately, Dr. Dhiman Kahali could not join this session because of the bad weather and network issues in Kolkata. We are going to rearrange the session in such a way that first we are going to have introduction on the speakers, second presentation on the topic by Professor Dr. Upendra Kaul, and then there will be a panel discussion with Dr. Kaul and Dr. Bahulian, followed by question and answer sessions. So the session should last up to 8 p.m. and if there are further questions, Dr. Bahulian will still be able to support us. So to begin with, first of all, I would like to thank the panelists for taking out their time and share the major topic in today's era. Okay. So first I would like to introduce Professor Dr. Upendra Kaul. Professor Kaul is currently Chairman, Batra Heart Center, Dean Academics and Clinical Research, Batra Hospital and Medical Research Center, New Delhi. He is a highly recognized name both nationally and internationally for his work in cardiovascular sciences. He is known as a passionate teacher and an astute clinician who is credited with starting the coronary angioplasty program in India and continues to bring innovative techniques in interventional cardiology to the country. He was also on the faculty of GB Pant Hospital, PGIMER Chandigarh and AIIMS, where he was a professor of cardiology. He has been involved in several public education programs all over the country, including in his place of birth in Kashmir. He established cardiology units at several hospitals in government and private sector. These include CT Center, AIIMS, Batra Hospital, Fortis Hospitals, Noida, Vasant Kunj, and SSIMHS at Puttaparthi, Andhra Pradesh. Professor Kaul has trained more than 400 cardiologists and has authored more than 400 papers and written many books. He is a visiting professor to several overseas universities. He is a fellow of several prestigious societies in cardiology, both nationally and internationally, and has delivered many named orations. He has held the posts of President of Cardiology Society of India and SARC Cardiac Society. He was also a founder member of the Asia Pacific Society of Intervention Cardiology. Currently, he is the co-chairman of the Credentials Committee of SCAI, USA, and course director of Asia, PCR, Singapore Live, and India Live. He is also editor-in-chief of the journal Asia Interventions and a joint editor of Euro Intervention. Professor Kaul has been the principal investigator of several national and international clinical research trials. He is the first Indian cardiologist to initiate the investigator-initiated multicentric trials on one of his recent trials, Tuxedo India, has received international recognition, which included a late-breaking trial at the TCT 2015 and a publication in New England Journal of Medicine. Among the numerous recognitions, he has also been awarded the coveted Dr. B.C. Rai Award and Padma Shri from President of India. Thank you, Dr. Kaul, for joining this session. The next panelist with us is Professor Dr. C.G. Bahulian. Dr. C.G. Bahulian, Chairman, Cardiovascular Center, Anantapuri Hospitals and Research Institute. Former HOD, Department of Cardiology, Government Medical College, Trivandrum. Dr. Bahulian is a veteran cardiologist with 36 years of working experience in cardiology and more than 22 years as an interventional cardiologist in India and abroad. He is a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, a fellow in intervention cardiology, Royal Adelaide Hospital, and fellow of the Society of Cardiovascular Angiography and Interventions. He is the founder director of the Kerala Heart Foundation and founder president of Intervention Cardiology Council of Kerala. Dr. Bahulian set up Cardiovascular Center at Anantapuri Hospitals in 2005. He has held senior posts in several hospitals in India and abroad. He was consultant cardiologist and chief cardiology at Al Amir Hospital, Kuwait from 1992 to 94. Over the last 30 plus years, Dr. Bahulian has independently performed more than 10,000 cardiac procedures, currently about 400 annually. He popularized the radial route of angioplasty and stenting and is proficient and experienced in the entire range of non-coronary interventions as well. Dr. Bahulian has also contributed his time and expertise to teaching and training activities and has more than 55 papers published in national and international peer-reviewed journals, has made many presentations at conferences and delivered innumerable lectures, talks and CMEs for medical students, doctors and others. His area of special interest are acute coronary syndrome, heart failure, atrial fibrillation and preventive cardiology. He has won several awards and honors. Some of them are like Lifetime Achievement Award in 2013 by Global Life Care Trust Trivandrum, Mahatma Gandhi Memorial National Center for Education and Research Service Excellence Award 2008, Guru Shrestha Award for Excellence in Medical Teaching 2005 and Cyber Millennium Award for Science and Technology. Without much ado, I would like to request Dr. Professor Upendra Kaul to start the session on preventive strategies for high-risk patients in COVID-19 era. Thank you, Lord, panelists.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I must, congratulate GE to take this very important initiative on talking on preventive strategies, which I think are very, very important. And it's my pleasure to be on the panel with Professor Bahulian, whom I know since I think 1980 or 81. We first met in PGI when he joined there as a DM cardiology student. And I'm so happy to see him grow all the way and has become such a proficient and internationally known cardiologist. So thank you, Dr. Bahulian, for joining us.
Okay, sir.
So I'm going to talk about the preventive strategies for the high-risk individuals in this COVID era, which is, surrounded us. Kerala has done very well, but rest of the country still is in the middle of a big pandemic. Now we know that the mortality of COVID-19 is low in the younger population. We know that people less than 50 years of age have a very low mortality. It's a very contagious virus, but low mortality in the younger people. But as the person grows older, beyond 50 years, the mortality goes on increasing. And in septuagenarians, it's about 8%, and people who are 80 and above, 14.8%. As you know, that people in Italy and other places, it was a very elderly population which succumbed to it, and they have a very large population of these very elderly people in Italy, in Spain, in the United States. So that is one of the very important issues. We also know that the fatality rate depends on the comorbidities. If a person does not have any comorbidity, the mortality is very low. But it is high for hypertensives, it's around 6%. For diabetics, it is more, 7.3%. And for persons with underlying cardiovascular disease, it is 10.5%. And we know that in our country, all these populations are in very, very large numbers. Now, what is the risk of getting a COVID infection in high-risk patients? When we talk about high-risk patients, means hypertensives, diabetics, and patients with underlying heart disease. The answer is it is not higher. But if the infection occurs, the disease can take a serious form. And that is because these people, elderly people, because of comorbidities, have lower immunity, their clearance rate of virus is lower, and they have more chances of getting into what is called as a cytokine storm, which is a very household name these days, when the ACE2 receptor is, getting the virus and it multiplies there, it leads to a lot of inflammation, and affects all the organs, primarily the lungs, and then every organ gets affected. So I think it's very important that our emphasis should be that the persons don't get this. So emphasis should be on the preventive strategies. Now coming to what about the hypertension people, hypertension patients, it's very important that persons with high blood pressure, first of all, non-pharmacological treatment measures are very important, and all of us know salt restriction, exercise, eating more of fruits and vegetables. And all the medicines which the person has been taking must be continued, and those include ACE inhibitors like enalapril, ARBs like losartan, like valsartan, like olmesartan, because there was a controversy in the beginning that because ACE2 inhibitor, ACE2 receptor is the site where the virus lodges, and it was thought in, theoretically these inhibitors might increase the expression of that receptor and you might get into problems. But this was not found to be true, and within a few months or within a few weeks, the guidelines from all the international bodies like American College, European Society, they all endorsed that they must be continuing all the drugs, including ACE inhibitors and ARBs. And it's extremely important because we always tell everybody that do not go out of home. Stay indoors. Don't go to the clinics. And for obvious reasons. So home monitoring BP becomes very, very important. And that should be done on validated machines so that one does not get into, alarm and, become very scared. So the measurement method of the blood pressure is very important. And then very important, never change the drugs on your own. If you find that BP is high, let me increase the dose, or if BP is coming lower, let me decrease the dose. Always consult your physician, who is always available on, so many methods of communicating with the doctors. And this is one important study in which many of us have participated. I'm sure many of the listeners have also participated in a study called India Heart Study of more than 18,000 patients done in 350 cities, 15 states, and more than 1230 physicians. It's recently published in Journal of Hypertension. And in this, the blood pressure was measured both at office and at home by a very reliable calibrated machines which recorded the blood pressure 3 times in succession on its own and would give the average. It also gives the heart rate, and also if the heart rate is very irregular, it points out that see your doctor, you might be having an arrhythmia, which many of you know is atrial fibrillation, which can be a precursor of strokes. Measurement techniques are well known that it should be done when the person is relaxed, not very tense, after taking some rest, in the right arm in the sitting position, and oscillometric recorders give a very good display of the pressure as well as the rate. Important findings of our study was that, first of all, that the home blood pressure was very reproducible. The so-called white coat hypertension, that means high blood pressure when you are seeing a doctor, is obviated by home BP monitoring, and also masked hypertension. That means in the clinic, because of reassurance, blood pressure is normal, but at home it is high. So it obviates if you record the pressures at home. And the other important finding was that we found that Indians have higher blood pressure in the evenings as compared to what we were taught that morning BP is higher. And a very important finding that average resting heart rate of Indians in this large study was around 80 beats, which is about 10 beats faster or higher than what is reported in the Western literature. So that about the hypertension. Let us come to the other risk factor, that is diabetes. And the care for a diabetic patient is extremely important. Once again, diabetics usually are easily motivable to have the blood sugar monitoring at home. And most of the diabetics, long-standing diabetics, have a measurement device. The sugar level should be maintained between 70 to 180. Too low readings are also not good, and very high are not very good. So the HbA1c or glycosylated hemoglobin, which we ask the people to get once in 3 to 4 months, it should be 7 or less than 7. and one must avoid very low blood sugar levels, hypoglycemia, which can lead to many problems. And blood sugar monitors, as you know, are simple ones. You just have to get a blood drop and put it on this. Others are that, there are some things which you stick to your skin, and you can have the blood pressure in the blood sugar levels calibrated, and also, morning, evening, continuously. So there are all kinds of blood sugar monitors available in the market. Once again, the care should include lifestyle measures like exercise, low-fat diet, lot of vegetables, meditation like pranayams and yogas, which are, very popular methods, are very good. And all the drugs which have been asked by your doctor must continue. And there are several mechanisms by which diabetes may increase the severity of COVID-19. If a diabetic gets COVID, because number one, maturity onset people are usually older, then very often at least 1/3 to half of them may have hypertension, high blood pressure, some heart disease, very high blood sugars. They are the clinical factors. And then some immunological factors on which we don't have much, command. Higher affinity, cellular binding, diminished viral clearance, and increased susceptibility to cytokine storm. Now, as you know, that if we compare severe versus non-severe COVID-19 infection in diabetics, you will see the severe infection shown in the gray bars is much more than non-severe infection. That means diabetics, when they get COVID, they get more severe form of COVID. And if you look at the mortality, these are all data in a meta-analysis of whatever studies are available, published very recently. Once again, you can see that the mortality of COVID in the persons who survive, the prevalence of diabetes is much lower, like here 14% versus 31% in the persons who succumb to it. So persons who succumb to COVID are much higher chance of being a diabetic. So are all anti-diabetics equally safe? This will be a very common question in your minds. Well, in general, metformin, which is one of the most popular drugs for the management of diabetes, and the newer sulfonylurea drugs are safe even during infections. And ACE inhibitors and ARBs are very frequently given to diabetics because of hypertension. We already mentioned they must be continued and they are very safe. What about immunonutrition? There are so many factors: the age, the gender, the diet, the gut flora, exercise, smoking, and there are many ways which are being, these days propagated, how to, improve your immunity, how to increase your immunity. Vitamin D has been said to be one of the things, and, exercise and, less stress. So all those things must be kept in mind. Are all the anti-diabetic drugs to be continued? Well, if no or mild symptoms, yes. If anybody has severe COVID-19 infection and is admitted to the hospital, most of the drugs, the SGLT2 inhibitors, which are very popular in the management, like empagliflozin, dapagliflozin, are stopped because they can produce dehydration, and the person in fever can get dehydrated. And it's a common rule for a sick patient, if sugars are high, we put them on insulin. What about the drugs? The drugs like metformin generally is very safe. Then this group of drugs, TZDs, that means pioglitazone and others, are not to be used. Otherwise also these drugs are not very popular, but they are supposed to increase the risk of pneumonia, and therefore they are avoided in COVID-19 infection. GLP-1 receptor analogs like liraglutide, that is Victoza injection, or duraglutide, that is the injection called, which is also available once in a week injection. It also increases the ACE2 expression in lungs, and it is usually not recommended to these patients. And sitagliptin, linagliptin, teneligliptin, which are the DPP4 inhibitors, there is no evidence for or against them. SGLT2 we already talked about. Glimepiride and gliclazide, they are okay. Hospitalized patients with COVID, we already discussed, should be better on insulin, and what form of insulin will be discussed and, decided by your treating physician. Whether insulin pump, basal insulin, those are final details. Now, can COVID-19 precipitate new onset diabetes? Well, it can, and there are several mechanisms. Number one, stress, anxiety, depression, which is common these days, can precipitate. So a person who is not a diabetic also, and the last 2-3 months has been indoors, it's a good idea to check your blood sugars. Irregular lifestyle, unhealthy diet, decreased physical activity, which has become, a rule, because how much exercise can you do at home? And also, direct viral damage to pancreatic beta cells has been noticed. So, what are the recommendations? Optimize the current therapy, not to discontinue the therapy, and use of telemedicine, which is the way to communicate, is the best, and attention to the lifestyle. So if the patients are diabetics, plasma glucose monitoring and checking the urine for ketones, insulin to be adjusted in these patients under supervision. Now we come to the very important and the highest risk group, that is the persons who already have heart disease. And that is patients who have had a heart attack in the past, many years ago or recently, patients who are chronic stable angina, stable patients who are being treated for angina and they are doing well, patients who already have had a bypass surgery, angioplasty, then some patients with cardiomyopathy who present as varying degrees of heart failure, and also patients who have got pacemakers, implantable devices. These are the patients who have got underlying heart disease of various kinds. The group with the highest risk, this is the group which is the highest risk and the most adverse outcome, so this is very important. First of all the cardioactive drugs must continue. Aspirin must continue. Statins, many of our patients are on good high-dose statins, must continue. Some of them may be on PCSK9 inhibitors, those injections which are given once in a week. That has to be continued. Heart failure drugs like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, ARNIs must continue. Once again, like in hypertension, aldosterone antagonists like spironolactone, eplerenone, beta blockers, diuretics, they should all continue in the same dosage unless your treating doctor feels for some reason it needs to be changed. And also, we don't have a vaccine for COVID, but we have vaccines for influenza and pneumonia, and that should be used because these people are more prone to any other forms of influenza and pneumonia. That has to be done. If the vaccination has not been done, then it should be done. Then very important thing, there can be overlap of symptoms because shortness of breath is frequently cardiac symptom. Cough also can be a cardiac symptom, and it has to be differentiated from the COVID symptoms. And now for that, a new ECG change or a echocardiographic finding which points towards the cardiac cause, a new change in the echocardiography, some new ECG change, which we know that some COVID patients also get ECG change, but a person who already has a heart disease and he gets some symptom and a fresh ECG change should be careful. Biomarkers like troponin and BNP are not very specific in this COVID era because if the patient gets COVID, troponins can get elevated, BNP can get very elevated. Sicker patients who are on ventilators usually have very high troponins, very high BNPs. So, but it can be troponin in a person with some symptom of rest pain and all. That could be an important finding, should not be ignored. And hospitalization is very important because one of the things is that patients with heart disease, patients with heart problem, patient with a fresh heart attack, avoiding to go to the hospital. Because one of the feelings was coming that we are seeing much less number of patients of acute cardiac emergencies. And the reason basically is because of the scare of getting COVID infection, patients not going. Because of that, you get into complications. The patient gets complications of heart attack, bad ventricles, arrhythmias, conduction defects, leading to higher mortality. So the rule that acute cardiac problem must go to a hospital stays. And presence of fever could be an important differentiator in patients with dyspnea and cough. Having fever should always alarm, and a COVID test should be done at, whenever there is a suspicion. What about now chloroquine and hydrochloroquine? This has been in big news. It comes every day, and we know that in vitro, glycosylation of the spike protein, that means that, beautiful spike which the corona virus has, chloroquine is supposed to interfere with that. It reduces the attachment to the ACE2. There are many prospective studies in progress, but we know also that chloroquine and hydrochloroquine produce some ECG abnormalities like QT prolongation, which can produce arrhythmias. So patients who have got long-term exposure for more than 3 months, who have got pre-existing cardiac disease, renal insufficiency, they are much more prone to the toxicity of chloroquine. And this is the coronavirus, and this is these spikes get into the ACE2 receptor. And there's a large database which is being worked upon for the prevention. Chloroquine or its derivative for prevention and treatment. A Cochrane systemic analysis is being done right now, which has, hundreds of thousands of patients, and some data is going to come out of it. Well, only 2 days ago, this article came in Lancet. Hydrochloroquine or chloroquine with or without azithromycin in 96,000 patients with an average age of 53.8, and half of them were females. Now you could see that patients who are on chloroquine or any group of derivative of chloroquine or a macrolide antibiotic had a much significantly higher mortality. That means this drug is not meant for treating the patients of COVID, whatever data we have, and this is one of the largest, registries of 96,000 patients. Now, what about chloroquine prophylaxis? I believe Donald Trump is taking it, although his associates are against it. Now, what are the guidelines from ICMR, which also have been again revised 2 days ago? And in that, the data is from retrospective case control analysis at ICMR, observational study of about 335 patients at AIIMS, and 3 central government hospitals in New Delhi who studied the healthcare workers involved in COVID-19 care. And they found that asymptomatic healthcare workers involved in containment areas and patients who were looking after them, they had less chance of getting COVID infection. So ICMR recommends that for them prophylaxis is being recommended. That is, on the first day, take 400 milligrams twice a day, and then 400 milligrams weekly for the next 7 weeks to be taken with meals, because it can produce gastritis. Then asymptomatic frontline workers such as surveillance workers deployed in containment zones, paramilitary and police personnel once again are recommended the same dosage for loading and then once in a week. And asymptomatic household contacts of laboratory confirmed cases are also recommended, that 400 milligrams twice a day and then 400 milligrams once weekly for 3 weeks, not for 7 weeks. If it is to be continued for beyond 8 weeks for asymptomatic healthcare workers, asymptomatic frontline workers, with the available evidence, the experts feel that beyond 7 weeks one should have, think about it, do an ECG, rule out QT prolongation, because that can lead to problems. So the present day status is that there is no indication for treating patients with COVID because we don't have the data. And a large registry has shown no benefit and risk of excessive deaths, which we've already discussed. 10 large-scale studies are underway, and information should be forthcoming in the prospective study. And the role of prophylaxis is also going on. although ICMR has put some guidelines, but larger analysis are in progress. What about statins? Statins also have a drug interaction when they are used with some of the antiviral drugs, like Remdesivir, which is going to be possibly available here also. The Jubilant company in India has got a collaboration, Jubilant. I think they also had shut because of high COVID positivity. They have started again, now they are all negative. But there's a risk of myopathy when these drugs are combined with antiviral drugs, so doses possibly should be lowered. And ST elevation MI patients, if they come, they need to be treated as we treat them, because to get the positive report takes some time, sometimes 12 hours, 24 hours, depending from place to place. And in regions where high rate of community transmission is, it's always good to label them as suspects. Take them to the cath lab, and one must see that if it's an acute ST elevation MI, large one, if you cannot take them, thrombolyze them, and then take them to the lab whenever possible with a COVID test. Otherwise, take them to the cath lab, use the personal equipment, personal protective equipment, all the things, do an angioplasty, take the patient and treat them as COVID positive till the time you get the report. And cath labs have to be prepared for that, negative pressure, so that you don't spread the COVID infection. And always consider fibrinolysis in case PCI is not available. And this is the way, if the patient has a 24/7 lab, we treat it the same way. If it is not there, and we fibrinolyze and then send them, or else if the other hospital is very close, you can send them. The same rules. Management of non-ST elevation MI, a low risk MI, treat them medically. They can easily be treated for 12 to 24 hours by dual antiplatelet and low molecular heparin. Intermediate risk also when the patient is a diabetic or ejection fraction is less than 40, post-infarction angina. They can also be treated by the usual methods and non-invasive testing till the time the test report comes. But the high-risk patients who have got dynamic ECG changes, recurrent symptoms, who cannot wait, should be taken to the cath lab like the ST elevation MI. Similarly, very high-risk patient has to be taken to the cath lab, otherwise the mortality will be very high, and they go by the same pathway as ST elevation myocardial infarction. The cardiac cath lab in the COVID era, minimum essential staff. They should all be geared with personal equipment, that is the protection equipment, standard techniques as per the practice, and keep the procedure short. Intravascular imaging and other things to be done only if they're absolutely essential, otherwise keep the procedure short and simple. So I'd like to conclude on this, I think an important topic, that hypertension, diabetes, and previous cardiovascular disease are very important risk factors for patient testing positive for COVID. These individuals are not more prone to get it, but once they get it, they get into problems. These individuals should always continue their existing treatment and do home evaluation of blood pressure, sugar, monitoring in order to minimize the adversity if it comes. Any new symptom of shortness of breath, chest discomfort should be taken seriously, should not be hidden, and it should be reported. And early evaluation of an acute heart attack always improves the outcome, whether it is COVID era or not a COVID era. Self-medication with chloroquine is not at all permissible. Its benefits are not proven, taken only if recommended, and I already talked about the ICMR guideline, but everybody taking chloroquine in the community is not at all recommended. In fact, in Delhi, most of the chemists have finished their stocks of chloroquine. So because of, I think, they thought that this is the panacea and this will cure it. This will allow them to be COVID free. And all previous medication should be continued uninterrupted. Finally, the mortality of treatable diseases should not increase while trying to contain COVID infection. Don't be focused only on COVID and go on increasing the mortality of other treatable conditions. There is a general impression that less number of patients is coming, but that defies any logic. Why should it be? And delay in the treatment should not be done, and we should propagate the message patients with fresh symptoms should be treated as we were treating them before. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Murthy.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kaul. I think we lost your voice towards the end, the last one. Is it okay now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Now you are back.
Okay, good,
So,
good.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, we have been circulating all the ESC guidelines, AHA guidelines for the COVID patients. This was very comprehensive with respect to how India ICMR guidelines, how you need to treat the COVID patients and why you should not, stop taking treatment and monitoring the patients. Very well brought it out. Dr. Bahulian, your feedback, your observation of the cardiovascular patients during the COVID era. So would you please throw some light on that?
Thank you, Murthy. Again, Dr. Kaul, an excellent talk on a topic which is actually not many areas are unclear. Many areas are changing as day by day change happens in concepts and understanding of this area. But you have given an excellent overview and clarified several areas in the COVID management and COVID timing. Especially drugs like hydrochloroquine, you have clarified very nicely, and the importance of comorbidities. We have this virus coming in, and compared to the previous virus, the SARS-1 as well as MERS, they have got higher mortality as such. The mortality of coronavirus is less. On an average, one could talk about a 2% mortality. But what decides is the comorbidities, like hypertension, diabetes, previous heart disease, all these things. When such individuals are affected, the mortality goes on increasing and comes to more than 14% on an average. And when it comes to an ICU admission with complications, the mortality goes even up to 50% in patients who have got these multiple comorbidities. It's very, very important from the preventive point of view. Patients who have got hypertension, diabetes or getting treatment for coronary artery diseases, they should be extremely careful in order that they won't get the coronavirus infection. And from the point of view of protecting such individuals, we have to observe this safety distance keeping, personal hygiene, all those things. But apart from that, they have to take care of their diseases very, very emphatically. Hypertensive patients, they should see that their blood pressure is controlled. Although we have understood that hypertension as such, that state as such is not predisposing the individual to higher infection rates. But once they get the infection, they have got more complications. And the higher the level of the blood pressure, the more uncontrolled the individual's status at the time they contract the disease, they have got a worse prognosis. So one has to essentially look at that the blood pressure is controlled. They have to comply with their drugs extremely well. And then when they are in the lockdown period, there is a risk that, you are not having your regular exercise. You are not having your regular stress of life. So you may you may get more increase in the body weight. And then you may sometimes skip the medications also. So these are some of the challenges when you get into the lockdown period. But see that you take the medicines regularly as prescribed earlier, and you try to reduce the body weight, indulge in regular exercises, and have a healthy heart diet at that particular period of time. And so also frequent checking of the blood pressure. Dr. Kaul has emphasized his study on home blood pressure monitoring, and he has pointed out that as we Indians, as they are different in several aspects, their home blood pressure monitoring is higher. Resting heart rate is higher. They are not good points, and they have got evening rise in blood pressure. These are all not very good. So monitoring of the blood pressure very, very important while they are in the lockdown period, and then try to control with the medications. And regarding the medications, all the world over, this confusion was there. Roughly more than 30 to 40% of hypertensive patients are taking either ACE inhibitors or ARB. And not only that, many heart problems are really requiring RAS blockers like ACE or ARB are being diabetic patients, heart failure patients, coronary artery disease patients, all of them will be having this particular group of drugs. But suddenly a movement came up that this drug is harmful because this drug keeps the ACE2, at which the coronavirus is actually entering into the cells through that ACE2 receptor. And they are upregulated by these particular drugs, and they believe that this will predispose the individuals to more and more coronavirus infections and more pronounced impact of that. But there is no evidence to say that. In fact, if you omit the drugs by keeping this wrong notion, you are going to get more problems because the blood pressure suddenly gets uncontrolled. When somebody is stable on these particular drugs and sudden withdrawal can produce a total uncontrollability of the blood pressure, and that is a negative. So this point has again been highlighted, and we all say that all societies of hypertension as well as the societies of European Society of Cardiology, the Indian Heart Association, Indian Heart Journal has also pointed out this particular point that there is no reason why we should stop ACE or ARB. In fact, there is some signal suggesting that in diabetic patients and hypertension, this particular drug is there. They may be faring better than other drugs for heart disease. These are some of the points which I would like to bring into this particular address. Regarding diabetes also, it has been emphasized that diabetes, the four cornerstones of this thing is that diet, exercise and medications, constant medications, and monitor frequently. Monitor, you have home monitoring, different devices are available for monitoring in the blood pressure, and see that you don't go into hypoglycemia, also you don't go into very high level of blood sugar. If you go into a higher level of blood pressure, blood sugar, then the ketoacidosis is going to be there, and that's very, very harmful in the context of acquiring coronary. So ketone bodies should be monitored. And you also keep in touch with your doctors or healthcare providers in your either through telemedicine. The moment you get into any problems or the moment you get into any doubt regarding the drugs or regarding the blood sugar level or any other symptoms you develop during that particular period, is very, very important to clarify on the spot itself with your contact with your medical professionals. So diabetes, we know that diabetes as patients when they get in COVID, they have got a still higher mortality than hypertension. Of course, cardiovascular diseases, they have got highest mortality. And pre-existing heart diseases puts the patient into high risk when they get the COVID situation. And now as interventional cardiologist and cardiologist who is looking into the management of acute coronary syndrome, it is great challenge. If you take my own hospital, it's not a COVID selective hospital, but still we are now presuming that any patient who is taken for intervention in the cath lab, we treat them as COVID patient unless otherwise proved. Of course, we send the samples, throat swabs are sent, but as Professor Paul has mentioned that it takes usually at least 18 to 24 hours before you get the result. When a ST elevation MI comes to the emergency room and the decision of primary angioplasty is planned, you have to straight away push the patient to the cath lab and proceed. And even today, except for one patient during the last 3 months, all our patients have gone in for primary angioplasty. Only one patient, as an alternate option, ESC has recommended that thrombolysis could be considered. Only one patient has gone in for thrombolysis because patients even now, they prefer the primary angioplasty. And by various reasons, if you could do in a timely fashion, that remains to be the best method of treatment. So that's a great challenge. One of the most important challenges is triaging these patients from the emergency room itself through a hospital pathway, which will prevent them getting in contact with the other healthcare workers and other patients, and then get them straight into the cath lab. And after the procedure in our hospital, we have got a special areas of isolation that is made now. That isolation, patient goes to that isolation room, and yesterday when the results come negative, they come into the general pool of CCU and then. This is very true for very high risk STEMI also. We may have to adopt that model. Low risk and intermediate STEMI, many a time you can take some time keeping them on dual antiplatelets, higher dose of statins and other anti-angina medications. But they again may require to go for intervention. So we keep that sort of a policies in there. Elective cases, well, you can wait. I would say that very complex elective cases, if the patient is asymptomatic, wait. And very important point Dr. Kaul has pointed out in the cath lab, make the procedure as simple as possible with minimum staff inside, with all PPE protection observed. This is what the probably which we can tide over these situations by adopting these cares. Thank you very much again, Professor Kaul, for your nice talk.
Good. Thank you. So let's see, any questions?
Yeah, there are questions coming up, sir. Before that, thank you, Dr. Bahulian, for highlighting, re-emphasizing what Dr. Kaul told and also sharing your experience. So before we move on to questions, Dr. Kaul brought up one very interesting subject called the telemedicine. Now there are a lot of things which has come up in the industry, the tele-ECG, tele-ICU, all those kind of things. I just wanted to know, like, what should these non-COVID and other hospitals to take care, because I have heard a lot of young people dying because of not diagnosing their heart variation. One of my friend, even in a place like Singapore, just overlooked, he's in the same industry, just overlooked, even the doctor told, because of the corona case, they told it may be gastric, and then he ignored, and next day morning there was a fatal MI. So what will be your suggestions, Dr. Kaul, and then followed by Dr. Bahulian, in the interest of the audience?
I think telemedicine is a wonderful way of communicating and sitting at home, and these days there are very small click devices which can record the ECG. You don't have to get the complete 12-lead ECG, which is also possible in some devices, but a few important leads and you get it and transmit it through the telemedicine. Talk to your doctor, discuss with the family, and you can prescribe, and you can always tell them, you take aspirin, and you are the person who must come to the hospital, you are the person who can wait, take this thing. And I think a lot of advice can be given in telemedicine, and video calls is the other way, because if you don't have that chamber of telemedicine, video call, WhatsApp call, in which you can transmit the things, straight away write the prescription. There are so many methods these days of communicating, and obviously one of the learnings of this period is the IT. The IT industry, which was being used suboptimally, is being used more and more optimally. And like we work sitting at home, and we're working, we're sitting here and discussing and seeing you and Dr. Bahulian and giving all the information. Similarly, so many people are watching us, listening to us. These are all the things, I think, which we relearned during this period, and I think hopefully when the COVID this thing finishes, this must continue. These methods are continued. They're much more cost effective. You don't have to go to a banquet hall to have a conference call and spend so much of money on registration and advertisements and having those gala parties. Yeah, that's good once in a while, but you can have all this is what I think this new underutilized method is being utilized more optimally. Dr. Bahulian?
Yes, sir. Moti, the 2 points are there in your question. One is about the new method of communication between the physician and the patient, that is by telemedicine. The other is what is happening right now. Is it because of the lack of telemedicine, or otherwise the patient who really require treatment when they is suffering from a cardiac ailment, say for example heart attack, they don't reach the hospital for what reason? That these are the two things. Telemedicine is definitely a progressive thing, and I think it is going to come up as the way it is being, but it has to be accepted by physicians like we people, as well as on the other side for the patients. So it will take some time before it gets into the flow, and I'm sure this is going to be a pathway forward, because it avoids a lot of inconvenience for lot of patients to come to a busy hospital and wait for consultation. He comes in the morning and finishes his consultation in the evening and going home. That's not required. So perhaps it's going to be the way forward. But I think we have to wait for that time. What happens currently, the patient's misconception. Patient develops chest pain. I also had instances that happened in our own place. that they don't go to the hospital. They think that, not because they are not realizing, halfway through they are realizing that they are having a problem. Still they are resistant to reach the hospital because of the fear complex that the hospital is full of COVID. So if you go there, you contract that disease and then stay home and get into problems, and even death has happened. It's not only your own experience, it's our own experience. It has happened. Second thing is that they keep on waiting, and you know that the important time is heart muscle. So when the patient reaches on time, you can do either angioplasty, primary angioplasty. It should be done in timely fashion. So that time, precious time, is lost, again at the cost of the patient. And the third thing is that delayed presentation to the hospital. They get into heart failure, they get into shock, and they get into the hospital. And in the COVID time, with all challenges prevailing in the hospital to give an optimal treatment, and the patient comes with a hemodynamic disturbance, it becomes all the more difficult. And mortality is definitely on the higher side. I'm sure a lot of data is going to come up on these aspects when the time passes on. What happens to these patients who recover? What is their cardiac status? What is their metabolic status, especially regarding glycemic control, especially regarding lipid control, and what are the residual cardiac disabilities these patients are going to have after this havoc is going to settle down. So I think we are all open to that, passing through that phase of disease.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, doctor. And I think we have so many questions which has now flown in. I would keep on asking few questions in the interest of time. I think some of the questions already in your presentation and sharing your experience, it has been answered. So first question I'd like to pick is from Dr. Mohan Jayathilake. He is asking, please explain about Kawasaki-like syndrome in pediatric population with regard to COVID-19, pediatric inflammatory multi-system syndrome.
Dr. Bahudia, would you like to answer this?
Kawasaki disease is there in Kerala, actually, in our pediatric population. I think it has been recognized, especially it is in zonal areas of Trivandrum, and our pediatric child institute has got a good experience on that. But with this coronavirus, this is probably not recognized much, to my information, from India. It is mostly seen from countries like United States, there where they have seen this dilatation of the coronary arteries and problems related to that Kawasaki disease. The exact mechanism by which this virus produces this phenomenon is really not known. Just like it produces when the coronavirus gets into the heart muscle, the ACE2 receptors are plenty in heart muscles, in blood vessels, as well as in lung. So the virus got the freedom to enter into that. Why some children are more predisposed to developing this Kawasaki disease will require more information and more understanding of this particular problem.
Thank you, sir. And the next question is from Dr. Ashok Puri. Which yogic exercise to be avoided in CABG patient and when to start?
Well, I think the yogic, if we're talking about CABG patient who has very recently had a CABG, when the chest wound is still healing and there is pain. So all those exercises which put pressure on the chest wall, like, abducting the hands and, lot of shoulder exercises, doing push-ups and other things, which can, put pressure on the suture line, which is still, still healing. Those should be avoided. And I think the patient himself would be a very good, control himself that, anything which brings discomfort to his wound, to his chest, he cannot do it. That is the best rule is don't push him to do that. He should be gradual in that. So I think in the yogic exercise, the pranayams and those relaxing exercises are very good. But those exercises in which, you have to turn upside down and, assume those very difficult postures possibly should be avoided unless the person is, adept in doing it for years together and now wants to do it again. So start it gradually. Don't put pressure on your wounds and other things. Otherwise, the arterial grafts and venous grafts are not going to get loosened by that exercise. It's only the skeleton which has been, sutured that can get into problems. So I think all the relaxing exercises are fine.
Thank you, sir. And there are many people who have, appreciated your presentation and discussion both of you have shared. Many people have appreciated and thanked Dr. Mohammad Zishan Ali Idrisi. So he's attended the call on the Eid, and his question is care for kidney patient. And I think there's another related question. What about transplanted patient, either renal or heart or immunosuppressive agents? Is it highest risk?
I think that's an important question. Once again, the data regarding immunosuppression and post-transplant patients once again comes from China, because Wuhan is also, there are big centers for cardiac transplant and other things. It was seen that even in the immunosuppressed patients, if they get COVID, there was not much of a problem. So they could handle it very well. They did not require any particular, this thing. But if the person is getting into some problems, then they recommend reduction in the dose of immunosuppression and possibly cyclophosphamide and other drugs, keep the steroids on. So that again has to be individualized. Similarly for the renal patients, once again they are very high risk patients, because most of the renal patients are also patients with hypertension. Many of them are diabetics, so they get all the risks of hypertension, all the risks of diabetes, and if they get into cardiac problem, there is a syndrome called cardiorenal syndrome. That means if the output of the heart becomes low, kidney gets straight away affected. We've seen very often that a person with normal creatinine, no past history, comes with a heart failure and his creatinine starts going up 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. And once the heart failure gets over, it starts becoming alright. Other way also, patients who are chronic kidney disease patients and they get acute kidney exacerbation and their creatinine jumps, sometimes they get into heart failure without any underlying problem in the heart. So this is both ways. This is a kind of a reverse connection. Heart and kidneys are very intimately connected. So treatment of one also helps the other. So diabetes, hypertension to be meticulously controlled, as both Dr. Bahulian and I have been emphasizing, and an additional renal problem depends upon what kind of renal problem the person has. A person having mild albuminuria on one extent, on the other hand, you having a stage 5 CKD with creatinine, EGFR of less than 30. There are different situations. And dialysis patients, again, you have a large number of patients who are on regular dialysis program. There's nothing to fear. You have to take the usual precautions. You're not more susceptible. Once you get a problem, that's a different thing. But it's not that a person who is getting twice a week dialysis should have only once a week, or a person who usually has 3 times a week dialysis must continue that. So those are the important things, that you must continue the renal treatment, renal replacement therapy, and be careful, be more careful, all those things, washing hands and sanitization and everything is extremely important, more so for high risk patients, because if they get even a mild infection, it can land you into a very serious problem.
In fact, to add to that, we had a cardiac transplant going on during this COVID time itself. So I think if you have that program ongoing, there is no reason why we shouldn't think that it should not be done during the COVID time. You take all precautions and then try to do that. You continue with the same standard immunosuppressive measures as you were doing otherwise, unless the patient really gets into COVID infected patient or things that, which obviously is not the situation.
Dr. Kaul, I know you were hard pressed for time. You have 1 minute for us. Dr. Bahulian has kindly accepted to stay on for some more time and take up questions. Dr. Kaul, one question for you before you log out. One question by Ajay Sinha. Your experience about cardiac complication in Indian population. Dr. Kaul sir, this is his question.
cardiac complications in a COVID population or otherwise? You know,
Experience about cardiac complication in Indian population. I think this
Well,
should be
Indian-
more on COVID patients.
Well, as we already discussed, that a cardiac patient, if he or she gets COVID, gets the worst outcome as compared to even hypertension and diabetes. And very often what happens, these three things are combined. Cardiovascular disease, he's a diabetic also and a hypertensive also. So all those things multiply. So we have to be extremely careful, continue to treat the patient's cardiac status very aggressively, keep the cholesterol very low. If the cholesterol, in spite of very high dose of statins, is still 70, 80, these are the patients who can get into problem, put them on medicine, Repatha, that is Evolocumab, injection once in a week. So you have to be very aggressive in terms of reducing. And Indian patients are usually 10 years younger. Their mortalities are higher. Their vascular tree is much more involved. Diffuse disease is more common. So experience of Indian patients with cardiac disease is much worse as compared to what we see in a Caucasian Western population. So one has to be very, very aggressive and treat it. All the things to be treated holistically, all the complications, all the associations have to be treated.
Thank you, Chief. Thanks a lot. You spent more time than permitted, but there's a huge request from so many of your students, patients, doctors. They want more such sessions, and they're asking when is the next webinar.
Okay, we'll let you know. And I think, Murthy, you had a good experience. We can have another one after some time on a little different subject, different
Sure, sir.
theme.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so may I log out?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. But we have still Dr. Bahulian.
Yeah, Dr.
He will be
Bahulian
with
is
us
here.
for some time, and we will try to take some more questions, but we will take up all these questions, and depending on the availability of the doctors, we'll try to get back with more answers. Dr. Bahulian, sir, I have more questions now. All the questions will be directed towards you.
Okay, Dr. Bahulian, bye.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, sir. We'll meet.
Thank you.
Right,
It's
thank you.
nice speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Good night. Take care. So many questions, sir. I'm just trying to filter, which is very useful, which will be very useful for.
Yeah.
There is one Ganesh Prasad Nagarajan Karthikeyan. Kerala performed cardiac transplant recently. How would you judge in Indian prospect?
Beg pardon?
Kerala performed cardiac transplant recently.
Yeah.
How would you judge in Indian prospect?
I think, Kerala has been doing it all along last so many years. And during this COVID time, we had these instances of two cardiac transplant. One was done in the government setup, Kottayam Medical College. The other was done on the private side. And it shows that the interest in the whole public, interest in the professionals to keep it ongoing even in this COVID time. And I think even in the Indian perspective, it is a very good example for others. I'm sure other states are doing very well. Say our own neighboring state, Madras, they are doing very well with regard to the heart transplant. Delhi is doing very well with heart transplant. But I'm just pointing it out that these two transplants done within a short time during this particular period of time is a great boost for this program to be ongoing and be doing very well in the country. So I think I find a good future for this cardiac transplant program in the whole of the country.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Tanvi T. Shinde. What's the evidence and risks in young hypertensive patient age less than 50 regarding to COVID?
No, there is a COVID, contracting the COVID, there is no relationship whether the patient is a hypertensive or otherwise compared to the general population. There is, if the person is very severely hypertensive and if he is taking medications, we can presume that if they are very well under control, they don't get into much problems even if they get a milder infection. a severe infection, and as the age goes higher, say for example 50 to 60, the mortality will be on to the lower side, maybe less than 4% or 3% like that. But as age advances, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, with the hypertension, the mortality goes high. So there is something to do with the age also, other than being a hypertensive population. So a 50, less than 50 hypertension, if they get a COVID, I don't think there is going to be much alarm, only because the person is having high blood pressure.
Thanks, sir. Lakshmi Prasanna C wants to know role of hydroxychloroquine prophylaxis in hypertension.
Well, we have heard very well from the ICMR regulations as well as from the Lancet registry that in fact in the Lancet registry it has been shown that for treatment purpose or as well as prophylactic purposes it is of no use. In fact, it is increased mortality. ICMR data, we have some data is there, but the quality of the data one has to look into. And then only we can reliably say and reliably advise that hydroxychloroquine is a good remedy or good drug to prevent the coronavirus to be obtained, to get into the patient. So I think it is premature to say that hydroxychloroquine is really a good drug either for prevention or for treatment. We have to wait for more data and more regulations from the ICMR. This is my own viewpoint. I have not started advising it either for prophylaxis, even for healthcare workers who is a high-risk group in this population.
Thanks, sir. Dr. Shruti, she has got so many questions, so I'll pick one. So, viral myocarditis due to COVID, how will it present?
Viral myocarditis. This is actually it indicates that there is a cardiac involvement. There is an acute injury of the heart muscle when the coronavirus enters into the heart muscle. It produces myocarditis, and then usually it appears as the clinical syndrome of tachycardia, hypotension, electrocardiographic changes, and rise in biomarkers, especially troponin. And usually the troponin elevation in coronavirus happens even without myocarditis because it's an inflammatory condition. Any inflammatory condition can produce some rise in troponins even without cardiac involvement. So simply finding that a mild increase in the troponin doesn't mean that the patient has got viral corona myocarditis. Anyway, troponin increase as a marker, it indicates that that disease is more sinister than those who do not have a troponin increase, even without cardiac involvement. But if you have a cardiac involvement, it definitely produces all the changes of myocarditis, ECG showing, as I mentioned, about tachycardia, STT changes, and heart failure. And that's a very, very bad situation.
Thanks, sir. Very informative explanation. Dr. Subhashis Sarkar wants to know, has it been confirmed if COVID-19 is a respiratory disease or it's more of an endothelial cell attack issue?
Well, it affects the respiratory system because ACE2, I told you the coronavirus enters into the cells through these receptors which is placed on the surface of the cell that is abundant in the lung tissue as well as the heart and the blood vessels. So there are instances of more involvement in the lung, and when the lung gets involved, the disease gets into a bad situation and the mortality is also higher. ICU care is also to be higher. That doesn't mean that it is purely a lung disease or lung-oriented infection. It can get into the other areas. It is multiple. It can produce a pro-inflammatory state, a cytokine storm which can affect not only the lungs, it can affect the heart, it can affect the other tissues in the body. So we cannot conclude that it is a lung-specific infection. It has got other aspects. It has got a lot of aspects on coagulation system. It has been observed. We are learning about that disease. We are understanding more about the manifestations. It can produce a high degree of thrombogenicity and even in situ thrombosis in the pulmonary vessels leading to pulmonary embolism has been described. It has produced DVTs. It has produced embolic complications. So the blood vessel disease, endothelial dysfunctions, all these are part of this particular syndrome.
Yes, sir. The questions are just lining up. I don't know how much time you can give us, so I'll keep asking.
Maybe another 2-3 questions.
Okay, sir. So one other question by Dr. Peter Joseph. How early will we see QT changes after starting hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine? How frequently does ECG need to be evaluated in individuals on this therapy? Even after normal QT on ECG, how long after during the course of hydroxychloroquine therapy can we start expect to see new QT changes, arrhythmias? Dr. Peter from Fourth Frontier.
Yeah, basically, it is preferable to have an ECG done before starting any patient on hydroxychloroquine. I already mentioned that I am not a person who is now recommending that, but those who are taking it, at least they should have an ECG monitored before they start to know whether there is a QT prolongation is there or because there can be individuals, healthy individuals can have a QT prolongation in the ECG which is unrecognized till that particular time. That is why we heard of a young doctor in Bengal, West Bengal, who died after the hydroxychloroquine has been taken by that particular doctor. So that's one step. Before you start, you take the QT, measure the QT interval by doing a ECG. And then, of course, we have listened to dosage of the hydroxychloroquine, and you periodically check your ECGs while you are taking that. If it is 3 weeks time, you take it on multiple occasions. It is a 7 weeks duration, you take it accordingly multiple occasions. And that is very, very important. ECG monitoring is very, very important. And the periodicity is decided by the duration where you are to take either 3 weeks or 7 weeks. But most important thing is that before you start, take an ECG and establish that your QT is normal. More important, additional medicines which you take that interact with the hydroxychloroquine, azathioprine if you take, and antibiotics like quinolones, and we have said about the one particular drug antibiotic is which is often prescribed is azithromycin, and that has got again potentiating the QT prolongation effect. So see that you don't take such drugs which can enhance the prolongation of QT when the patient is on hydroxychloroquine. These are some of the precautions one should carry, if at all, if one is taking hydroxychloroquine from the point of view of prevention.
Yes, sir. The one Dr. Rajesh Verma wants to know, what do you think of future medicine in India? He strongly believes that because of much attention on COVID-19 infection, we are not giving due attention to our routine patients.
I think that should not happen, first of all. We should be giving attention equally to our routine patients and other problems, whether it is gastrointestinal, whether it is pulmonology, whether it is cardiology, whether it is oncology, whatever it is, we should be able to attend to all other patients. Only because COVID, it should not take our attention to that. COVID requires a specific attention, and specific attention means attention to the patient as well as attention to the healthcare providers, attention to the hospital atmosphere, so that you should not spread the infection. So that's a different challenge altogether. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't care for other people. This is a common problem now emerging. Even public is asking, you call for a doctor and then try to get treatment for that particular illness in the hospital. You say that don't come to the hospital because it is COVID time. I think that answer should not be there. This is my suggestion.
Yeah, in Kerala you have done really good job, sir. But what doctor has asked Rajesh Verma, I think this questions, if we get to know a lot of things in the newspaper. Patient refused to take in this hospital because he's COVID positive or suspected COVID and all.
Yes, it's a very, very sad thing, very, very sad. And because of that, the patient dies.
Yes,
not from
sir.
COVID,
You're right.
from other ailments, which it should never happen. COVID, we don't have a treatment, no panacea at the moment. But the other diseases, we have got very good remedies.
So one last question, sir. You have been very patient and kind enough to take questions, but questions are growing. People are appreciating your conference. People are thanking for presentations and information, and very fruitful sessions, informative, looking forward for more such. It's going on. But one last question from Dr. Tanvi Shinde. What are challenges, clinical diagnosis versus telemedicine? Or how do you compare clinical diagnosis versus telemedicine?
Well, myself belonging to the previous generation of physicians and doctors, I believe in clinical medicine. The answer is very short. Telemedicine is something which I am going to experience, and I have to form an opinion after some time when I feel that it is okay to replace clinical. So to have a patient seen by you in person, talking to the person on face, clinically examining the patient, and then making a decision in front of the patient by seeing him is not replaceable at the moment in my own point. But telemedicine is going to be a future, and it has got a lot of attractions, and times are changing. A post-COVID time is also maybe something which is unimaginable for us. So even I may say that now I am practicing telemedicine. So that is my take on that.
Thank you so much, sir. Even from our organization, many people have liked your explicit sessions and those kind of things. Thank you so much for your time, for your presentations. I would like to take this opportunity to thank both Dr. Bahulian, and it looks like it's very popular session. We will revert back if we can get you all together and carry more such sessions. Thank you so much.
I would like to thank you, Murthy, and all your team from GE. It was an excellent session. I enjoyed the session very much, especially with the Professor Call's association. As he has told you, from 1980 onwards, we were in touch, and then we were in close contact. So, and this session was a very good, nice session, and I wish you all success in carrying it on, and then it will contribute to education as such. That's very, very important, especially in the era where we don't have too many contacts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. Thank you, audience. Thanks for your patient listening. We will try to come back with more answers to your questions. So we'll have to figure out the time and other things. We'll come back to you. We have your contact IDs, so we will come back to you. Thank you so much. We are going to end the session now.